Good afternoon. So nice to see you here. We all know that's a very busy day for news, but here we are. And without further ado, I would like to introduce again to this press briefing room His Excellency, the President of the General Assembly, Mr. Dennis Francis. We will talk to you about his official visit to COP28 in Dubai. And as a matter of fact, he's flying today. Mr. President, you have the floor.
Thank you, Monica. And good afternoon to all of you, and welcome to this press conference. We are delighted that you're here with us. I'll begin by making some introductory remarks, and then, of course, we'll open the floor for your questions, comments, etc. Good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for joining today's briefing. I would like to take a few moments to reflect on the recent visit to the Pacific Island Forum Leaders meeting in the Cook Islands, as well as look ahead to my impending visit to COP28 in Dubai. Firstly, the visit to the Cook Islands was at the invitation of the Prime Minister and was intended to shore up support for small island developing states facing the existential threat of sea level rise. I say threats, plural, because it is not only about displacement or loss of land and territory, it is also about the legal and cultural aspects of such a loss. What happens to a nation's maritime boundaries as small atolls disappear? What happens to the air and maritime rights of such a country? Does this affect the sovereignty or statehood of small island developing states? Linked to these questions are deeper concerns around losing culture, identity, and heritage. Many small island developing states have millennia of history. Going back to early seafarers, their traditions, like their islands, are nearly pristine, protected and evolving in their unique ecosystem. All of that can be washed away as people are dispersed by the impacts of climate change. As President of the General Assembly, I went to reassure leaders that the UN General Assembly recognizes their concerns and is intent on taking the necessary actions to protect homes, homelands, and heritage. I am committed to support the work of the Director General of the International Organization of Migration, as well as the Director General of UNESCO, to address the issues of climate, mobility, and heritage, respectively. And I welcome the political declaration that was adopted at the conclusion of the PIF leaders' meeting on affirming that international law supports a presumption of continuity of statehood and does not contemplate its demise in the context of climate change-related sea level rise. This brings me to COP28. I will travel today and remain in Dubai until Sunday, the 3rd of December. I will participate in the World Leaders Summit and other high-level events, as well as co-host a number of high-level events and roundtables. The messages I will take with me to the COP include: 1. The need to conclude work and operationalize the funds and funding arrangements for loss and damage. Least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states need these resources to reconcile the impacts of climate change on their communities. 2. The need to support the COP28 presidency's bid to triple renewable energy capacity. This is the only sure way to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and keep 1.5 degrees alive. 3. The need to urgently and dramatically scale up support for adaptation, including delivering on a global goal on adaptation and exponentially driving up finances. And 4, finally, but most importantly, the need for unity and solidarity. The international community must demonstrate to the people of the world that we can deliver. We need a win, and COP28 can be that win. With that, I look forward to your questions.
And the first question goes to Valeria Robeco, President of ANCA. Valeria, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Monica, and thank you, Mr. President, on behalf of ANCA for this press briefing. My question is on the Middle East. These few days of pause and maybe like the new extension gives all sides some breathing space, but the critical question now is what happens whenever the negotiated truce expires, or since there is more pressure every day for this truce to become a permanent ceasefire, if you are hopeful that this can be a possibility. Thank you in the near future. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. I have to say that in diplomacy, all things are possible. Once the two sides sit, and the interested parties sit around the table and begin a conversation, we do not know where that will lead. But if you go back in the records, you will see that from the very inception of this crisis, on the 7th of October, I have consistently called for a ceasefire. Ceasefire. Absolute ceasefire. And the reason for this is clear. Because violence begets violence. It doesn't solve the problem. You need the political engagement to get to a solution. And because, consistent with the beliefs of the UN, the need to save lives. Once hostilities are taking place, lives are under threat, imminent threat, and we've seen the consequence of that with approximately 15,000 people making the ultimate sacrifice in 5 weeks. That clearly is unsustainable and does nothing to solve the problem. So, I welcome the pause, I welcome the extension. I would like to see the pause be converted into complete ceasefire so that other things that need to happen conversationally, a political process, can then begin.
Thank you, President Francis. I have you as you raise your hands. Now, Ahmed Fati, afterwards Benno, and then Stefano. And so I would like to also remind everybody that's also a conference on COP28, so we welcome your questions as well. Of course, other questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Mr. President, for this briefing. Can you please expand a little bit about the fate or the future of the island nations that have the threat to be going underwater, especially in the South Pacific? And you said that you want to make sure that these states does not demise. How then can they continue to exist as a state while they have no land. I remember from a few years back that the island nation of Fiji have agreed to accept the citizens of Palau, another UN member, to move to Fiji if their island is being drowned underwater. So can you expand a little bit on this legal issue? Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, let's go to first principles. All nations may, if they so choose, if they qualify, seek membership of the United Nations. But for that to happen, you must have a defined territory. Defined meaning your international borders must be established and recognized internationally. What small island developing states are facing, particularly those in the Pacific, is the imminent rise of sea level as a consequence of global warming. More specifically, this is related to the fact of the ice melt taking place in Antarctica and in other parts of the world. What it can mean effectively in the case, for example, of Tuvalu is that perhaps by 2050, the island of Tuvalu would have been largely submerged, inundated. And maybe the people of Tuvalu will have to relocate to some alternative place that can become their home. But what is at stake here is not simply the loss of land, as terrifying and worrying as that is. Other things are also at stake. People everywhere, but including on islands, who have inhabited islands for decades, for hundreds of years, there's something typically referred to as island culture. It's not the same on every island. Every island has its own peculiarities, what makes it unique and distinct, a sort of national identity. And I saw this dramatically in the Cook Islands. That once people are relocated, there's a great risk that disappears. The heritage that would have been built up through transmitting intergenerationally customs and practices also become at risk. So you have a complex situation in which the land has disappeared. But when the land disappears, does it mean that the state disappears? Because that state would have been a member of the United Nations, membership of which accords it, vests in it, certain rights, responsibilities, and obligations that are typical of all states. Do those rights disappear with the land being submerged? International law has not addressed this question. There is a gap. Why is this important? It's important for a number of reasons. Because those of you who have taken the time to read a little bit more in international law would know that the territory of a state exists in two dimensions, above the water and beneath the water. There is something called the continental shelf that extends way out in some cases. That's land beneath the sea. And many states, the international law provides that you exercise sovereignty, control, over something called the territorial sea, which is 12 miles off your coast. That's part of your national territory. But you exercise economic sovereignty also over an adjoining zone called the exclusive economic zone. So all the fisheries, all the assets that exist in that exclusive economic zone belong to the coastal state. It means, therefore, in the case of the Pacific Islands, if those islands should become submerged and they no longer exist as land territory, what does that mean? What are the implications for the exercise of their rights over what would have been before their exclusive economic zone? And as it happens, beyond that zone, in something called the deep seabed, this sounds very academic, but this is real. In the Pacific Islands, beyond that zone, there are extraordinary deposits on the seabed of something called polymanganate nodules, rich in metals, molybdenum, cobalt, all sorts of things. These things can be as large as a grape, or maybe even as large as, I don't know, a pumpkin. And they are produced by the Earth's crust. And under international law, all of the resources in that area, in the deep seabed, are not under the control of any single nation. They constitute something called the common heritage of mankind and are to be shared equally and equitably among all states in the system. So, what happens to those deposits in the Pacific if those states go underwater? Are their rights suspended? Or will they lose their rights over those resources? Nothing said in the existing international law on that. And so, really and truly, even if they were to relocate and go somewhere else to live, are they simply to become a charge on the exchequer of the country that's hosting them? Will they be able to generate their own resources and income from those resources that they control? And so there's a need for the international law to bring clarity to this issue. Because what is at stake is their very existence as states, in addition to the livelihoods and heritage and culture of a people that might have lived on those lands for thousands of years, in which certain practices would have been handed down generationally. And if this is to be the fate of small island developing states, of which I believe it's a fairly significant number of states that can confront this problem, then it is a problem that warrants the attention and treatment by the international community. because it is not going to go away. It is going to affect a substantial number of members of the international community, and questions about their rights need to be resolved for practical reasons. That's the reason I went to the Pacific Islands, because they are at increased risk of inundation. I mean, you can see the evidence of it when you drive around the coastline. These are people who, imagine what it would mean if any of us, or families having lived on land for 500 years, 1,000 years, had to get up and relocate to a strange, unfamiliar place and start all over again. It's not an easy thing. So this is an urgent problem that demands the attention of the international community. And to relate it back to COP, where there is an urgency for the COP to take the strategic decisions that would be necessary to alter the course of climate change, to reduce the rate of warming of the atmospheric temperatures, in order to give small island developing states, such as those in the Caribbean and in the Pacific, a fighting chance. You notice that I'm wearing a pin that says 1.5 degrees. I've worn this pin for several months. In fact, even before I became the PGA, I started wearing this pin. Because this 1.5 degrees is the threshold temperature that SIDS are demanding should be observed. There are some who are saying, no, it should be 2 degrees, but 2 degrees would imperil SIDS. And so it's a matter of strategic lobbying, in a way, that I wear this pin, because this really is, for SIDS, an existential issue. When we say it, it's not an exaggeration, and it's not a cliche. It is real. People's lives and livelihoods are at stake, and their very survival is at stake.
Thank you, President Francis. I have Beno, Deutsche Presseagentur. Go ahead.
Thank you, PJ, for the briefing. Thank you, Monica. I actually wanted to ask you about your pin. 1.5 degrees Celsius, that's still the goal, but it seems like wishful thinking more and more. Scientists say that it's increasingly unlikely because the big emitters don't do enough. And my question would have been, but you kind of answered it as well, like, when is it time to shift to another number?
We're not shifting to another number.
Yeah, but like, will you wear that like for the next 20 years till it's...
Well, you're right. There is evidence that not enough has been done and is being done to meet the 1.5. And truth be told, because of the damage that has already been done to the atmosphere, even us advocates of the 1.5 are aware that even if we were to achieve this 1.5, there would still be warming beyond the 1.5 degrees. The issue is to keep the rate of warming as low as is possible, because the lower the rate, the less severe are the impacts of climate change. As you know, the scientists have also said that as the Secretary General referred recently to global warming as global boiling. And what this means is more virulent, more frequent climate extremes, very destructive and very difficult, making it very difficult for small island developing states, for example, who have to be rebuilding infrastructure every 3 or 4 years in the context. If you live in the Caribbean or in the Pacific, when it's hurricane season, you're literally walking on eggshells because you're aware that one hurricane, can devastate an entire island and destroy its economy in a shorter time as maybe 12 hours. Imagine your GDP is gone, as the French say, tout un coup, all of a sudden. There's no work, there's no water, no power, no electricity. The place becomes impassable because roads, necessary infrastructure is destroyed. Telecommunications, electricity, road connections, bridges, communities are isolated. These are the real impacts of climate change that we are living with now, and that is why it is so urgent for the international community to show bold leadership, to step up and do what needs to be done to assist and support developing countries in the global south to cope more effectively with climate change.
Yeah, can we move on? Okay. Stefano, you have the next question.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Mr. President. Like you said, the diplomacy, everything is possible. So my question is this: you know, I've been here for some time now, but the president of the General Assembly is difficult to remember. Yeah, you remember maybe names, but what they did. You know, if you tell me about president 5 years ago, 10 years ago, the only one I remember what he did, for example, was the 70th president of the Danish Morgan Lichtoft, because he left us an election of the Secretary General more transparent. He fought for that. So my question to you is this: you have about roughly 7 months before there is an election of the next president, and maybe you already did, or maybe you are planning to do it. But what's going to be the issue? Maybe you already told us. But what's going to be something that you're going to fight to leave a mark? So hopefully, in 10 years from now, we will not only remember your name, but also what you did.
Well, this issue, the issue of sea level rise, and in working to ensure that we clarify the issue in order to give countries in this circumstance clarity, predictability, and certainty about their future. Because, as I said before, international law is totally silent on this. Climate change did not exist in the way that it does now 30 years ago. It didn't exist. So this is the defining issue, would be one of the defining issues that I hope will be addressed meaningfully and effectively by the international community, because of its widespread impact on a large group of states, many of them small, but in a system in which small states continuously have made a very valuable contribution. My own country, Trinidad and Tobago, was extremely active and recognized to be so in the realm of international law, and in particular in the law of the sea. There's a internationally recognized international lawyer, the late Lennox Balla, who wrote paragraphs and paragraphs in the Law of the Sea Convention that unblocked difficult um, disagreements during the negotiations. The point I'm making is that small countries, and there are many, many of them, have made and continue to make, have the potential to make large contributions, disproportionately large in terms of their size, to international relations, to the United Nations, and to multilateral diplomacy. Trinidad and Tobago also, you may or may not be aware, was one of the key players that created, along with others, the International Criminal Court. So multilateral diplomacy and the UN system, contrary to what many people believe, is not a forum for the big and powerful only. It's a forum for all, because the real power is in the power of principles and the power of preparation. And no country, regardless of how large or how small, has a monopoly on intellectual capacity. So that is the value, and that is why we need to preserve and to help these small islands to continue to exist. Because who knows, perhaps some invention that might change the course of human history might come from one of those islands in the Pacific.
Thank you, Mr. President. And before we give the floor to a colleague here, I just want to check online that we don't have anyone. If you are online and would like to ask a question, so please speak up. I can see from here a hand. It could be an old hand. But anyway, so I give the floor, the microphone to you. Please go ahead.
This is Arun Lewis from Indo-Asian News Service. I have a question about how you treat, or rather how countries are treated in terms of their greenhouse output. For example, you list China, USA, and India as the biggest polluters, but then if you look at the per capita emissions, they're pretty low compared to a lot of other countries, in the industrialized world. So wouldn't it sort of, take the per capita output? For example, in the case of the US, it's got more than twice that of China and nearly 8 times that of India. So wouldn't that mean that countries like that have to be treated on a per capita basis, which might mean severe changes in their lifestyles and so forth? And also, you have the heritage of what went on before, where these countries that now are the biggest on a per capita basis, the producers of greenhouse gases have historically been huge producers in the past, which gave them the leg up in terms of their industrialization and quality of life. Thank you.
Mr. President.
Well, I understand the question you're asking. However, the fact of the matter is that what is required, and in fact the climate agreement acknowledges this, countries are required to make a contribution to the system based on their capacity to do so. In other words, it would be unreasonable and impractical to require a small country, like, let's say, Suriname, which in fact, the country of Suriname, a Caribbean country, is actually climate neutral. They virtually have almost no carbon footprint at all. So it would not be reasonable to expect Suriname to make a contribution that is no different from the contribution that a large emitting country would make. The system is structured in such a way that the contribution you make to greenhouse gas reduction is proportionate to your contribution to the carbonization of the atmosphere. And therefore, what it means is that you have different levels of contribution. It is true that some countries have used hydrocarbon energy to develop, and now they are asking that this be changed. But we have to deal with the situation as it exists now. And as it exists now, the science has demonstrated irrefutably, that we cannot continue on the current trajectory. It is imperiling life as we know it on this planet and the planetary ecosystems themselves in every part of the world. It is impossible to deny the catastrophic effects and impacts of climate change. Drought, flooding, forest fires, coral bleaching, it's all there. And so as an international community, we need to work together cooperatively to find a solution to this problem, because if we don't do so, our existence on this planet will not continue in the way we know it now. Radical change will result, and most of that change would not be in the interests of human civilization.
Thank you, President Francis. We go to Volodymyr. I think it's the last question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Mr. President. In your opinion, to what extent do the current wars, in particular Russia's aggression against Ukraine, prevent humanity from fighting global warming?
Well, that's an interesting question. I have to say I haven't given very much thought to it. But fighting climate change and global warming has to be a team effort. It's the only effective way to do it. And the team has to be the entire international community. Okay? It would have been preferable, certainly, not to be forced to be doing so in the context of wars raging around. That is not a choice that we made, it happened. And so we have to do both. We have to deal with the peace and security issue, but we also have to deal with the development-related issue. Because climate change and the climate crisis is a development issue. It's an issue of development. And so, given that it's an issue of development, and given the requirement that funding is made available in order to assist and support those who do not themselves have the wherewithal to undertake the reforms that are necessary in order to stabilize the climate, the opportunity for that funding to come forward, I suppose, may well be complicated by the existence of these other situations that demand expansive resource allocations. However, the international community has a choice. We can do nothing or do little, as we've been doing on climate change, and watch that which human beings have devoted themselves to for centuries, the development to lift our quality of life, to watch it all go away, or do something decisive to protect our way of life, to protect the planet so that the planet is able to sustain us into longevity, and to ensure that those of us who follow, the future generations, are able to live in a safe, healthy environment, because we took the steps necessary to protect the environment and to protect the planet.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Do we have anyone online? If we do, I see somebody. No, probably not.
Yes.
Okay, so please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Monica, and thank you, Mr. President, for doing this. And I want to ask about Bangladesh. Obviously, Bangladesh is very vulnerable on climate change, and they're the most polluted country in the region where Bangladesh is, and the most vulnerable on democracy as well. I want to specifically, I need to know what initiative UN, as president, you are taking for Bangladesh as one of the critical member state is moving in a dark way, in another way around. As you noticed probably, the Bangladesh regime declared election schedule on January 7 on crackdown on opposition, systematic crackdown on opposition, and putting the opposition leader and workers in the jail. Many have been killed, and ignoring the international community's calls for the political consensus. So there will be a one-sided another election, as you know, 2014 and 2018 election rubbed out. So what is your comment and what initiative you are taking as the president of the General Assembly that to ensuring the voting rights and democratic rights of the people of Bangladesh? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. I should say, first of all, that the issue of the Bangladeshi elections is not on the agenda of the General Assembly of the United Nations. It's not there. So the only comment that I would make in relation to the question that you ask is that I would hope that Bangladesh, which has a long and strong tradition of democratic governance, realizes the importance of honoring that tradition, and that the impending elections will be free and fair and can be certified to be free and fair. That would be in the best interest of the people of Bangladesh, and it would certainly, I believe, strengthen their potential to maintain and even expand their relationships with the United Nations and with the international system. Democracy is an extremely important foundation upon which sustainable development can be pursued. And Bangladesh needs to support sustainable development consistent with Agenda 2030. So, best of luck in your democratic elections.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I have to say that while we were speaking, we got several messages here from colleagues who were here but had to leave because they have a stakeout to attend. We would like to thank you very much. We know you took the time and you have a plane to catch.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, for your interview, for your press conference. And thank you, everybody here and online. Have a good afternoon. Thanks.
You're very welcome. Bye-bye.